Good evening, everyone. How are you? My name is Sarah Hunstead. I am a paediatric nurse, mum of two, and author of A Life, a Finger, a Pee, Up a Nose, a practical guide to baby and child first aid. And tonight we are talking about using sunscreen on babies. Now, when we talk about this tonight, what I want you to remember is that we could talk for hours about sun safety. We really could, but we're really going to focus on sunscreen use tonight because that is one of the questions that you have asked us to talk about. Before we go any further, what I would love you to do is just give me a thumbs up or a wave just to make sure that all the technology is actually working properly so that I know that you can hear and see me well. And remember, what we also will do is post this and pin it to the top of the CPR Kids page so that you can watch it again afterwards if you're not able to stream it live right now. And what I would also love you to do is, at CPR Kids, our mission is to empower every parent and carer of kids with not only with the life-saving skills of baby and child first aid, but also what we want to do is just abolish all of those medical myths out there. We, want to just kind of not get rid of Dr. Google, but just, get out there and sort out all the fact from fiction for you. And so that's why it's really important that you let us know what kind of Facebook Lives you would like us to bring you. Now, importantly, if you could tag any friends down below who you think may be interested in this, because the more people who know, the better it is. So let's get into it tonight. Now, what we are going to start with is sunscreen. Now, one of the most common questions that we get is, can I put sunscreen on my baby? Well, the answer is yes, you can. But, okay, so now when we talk about a baby, often you might notice that on sunscreens, particularly even baby sunscreens, for example, it says do not use on babies under 6 months of age. It doesn't usually give an explanation as to why you can or can't do this. And so that's really what I want to talk about tonight. And importantly, how much do you need? All of that kind of stuff. So first of all, the important thing is when you've got little babies, of course, and also toddlers, that the idea is that you try and keep them, out of the sun in the hottest parts of the day. That's an important thing. Often we can't do that. You might have school pickup for the older siblings. You've got to go get them. Sometimes we have to just do that. So it's not always practical to stay in shaded areas for that time. Sometimes we have to go out and do that. Just need to be aware that little babies are also, they're much smaller than we are. They're much more sensitive to heat and things like that, and heat-related illness. But that's a whole other Facebook Live, which we will be doing in a few weeks as well. That's heat-related illness. But we'll stick to sunscreen today. So if you do need to go out, of course, staying in shady areas if you can, making sure that your baby and toddler, of course, is wearing their hat, which they're going to take off again, and then you're going to put it back on their head, and then they're going to take it off, and then you're going to put it back on. And so what I recommend that you do is just keep persevering, keep wedging that hat on their head. Hopefully, eventually they'll get it that it's not negotiable. That's an important thing. And of course, what we want to do is we want to actually minimize the amount of skin in babies that we need to put sunscreen on. So we want to minimize the exposed skin. So how do you do that? You dress them long sleeves, long pants, but of course, cool, breathable clothing. So that's the important part. So it's important that we're not overheating them. So it's finding that balance, but trying to actually not expose their skin as much as we can to the sun. But of course, there are going to be bits that are poking out. We know that. So we've got the hat, we've got the cool, loose clothing. We're not, the important thing to remember too is that our clothing that's got quite a wide weave on it will still let UV in. So, we're talking about that clothing with just the cotton clothing, for example, that will still be able to block some of that. That's why at the beach, rashies are so important. A t-shirt doesn't cut it. Okay, we need to be using rashies that are made of that UV fabric. So that is a really important point to remember. So we're covering up those bits that we can. You may have seen our post recently on covering up the pram. So when they're in the pram, making sure that you're not putting a towel or something that's going to restrict airflow, that you're using something to cover the pram which allows really good airflow so there is no overheating. So jump and have a look at our post on prams and coverings on prams, because otherwise, once again, that is a whole topic in itself for us on a Facebook Live. So we've talked about how staying in the shade, covering up, but there are little bits that are going to be exposed. And what the Australian College of Dermatologists positioning statement of sunscreen in babies says is minimise the use, only put it on exposed areas. That's an important thing. They do not recommend widespread use of sunscreen, particularly chemical sunscreens, because baby skin absorbs a whole lot. They're quite small. So if something that, you know, it really isn't too much on us can be quite a lot in a baby as such. So let's just break that down into the different types of sunscreen. So you just heard me say that the Australian College of Dermatologists doesn't recommend the widespread use of chemical sunscreens in babies. So what is a chemical sunscreen? There are two different types of sunscreens. One is a physical blocker, or what it does is it kind of blocks the UV rays, or it also can be called, it scatters. So what it does, it's like a barrier on the skin. So imagine it's like a barrier, and what it does is it kind of deflects the UV and scatters it. So it's like a shield as such. So most common ones are zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. So those are mineral-based sunscreens. And then we've got the chemical sunscreens. So these are the UV absorbers. So they absorb into the skin and actually absorb that. So it's important to remember that there are the two different types here. And what the Australian College of Dermatologists recommends is that if you are going to use a sunscreen, because sometimes we have to, you can use, obviously trying to cover up areas with clothing first without overheating your baby. You can use particularly a physical sunscreen on those exposed areas like the face, the hands, the tops of the feet. So that's an important thing that you can remember. You can actually use a physical sunscreen such as a zinc oxide on a baby under the age of 6 months. We just don't want, tongue-tied, sorry about that. They just don't want you using widespread chemical sunscreens on babies. So there we go. That's the positioning statement. I'm going to pop the link to that in the comments below so that you can see that. Now, some other things that we need to know. A lot of people say, well, I put sunscreen on, but I still got burnt. You know what? Us Australians are really terrible at putting on sunscreen. And even on our kids, I don't know about you, but my kids, one of them was fine with sunscreen having put on. The other one was a nightmare. So we often choose things like rollers or spray sunscreens to try and make that easier for the application. But we need to remember, you need to be liberal with your sunscreen use. So particularly what can happen is when we use a spray sunscreen, it doesn't actually put enough on the skin. So what I do recommend is that when you use a roller or if you're using a pump pack, make sure that it's a really liberal amount. Now, I've got a little measuring cup here and it's just kind of settled a little bit. But there is 35 mils of sunscreen, okay? So that's bigger than a shot glass, by the way. That's a much bigger glass. How much does this hold? This holds at 120 mils, or almost, actually it probably holds about half a cup. That much is how much sunscreen an adult should put on their body in one application. So the Cancer Council recommends that an adult uses a teaspoon per limb, a teaspoon for the face and neck, a teaspoon for the back, goodness gracious, for the back, and the teaspoon for the front, so that we have, and you've got your limbs as well. So that's about 35 mils of sunscreen for one application. We need to apply this about, so, you know, for example, if your child's half your size, they probably need half of that, but we need to be liberal. We need to apply it 20 minutes before you go out into the sun because it needs to adhere to the skin. That's why rubbing in is so important. I don't know about you, but my kids, when they've put their goggles on, like they put on the sunscreen, they, you know, quick, put it on, quick, we've got to get in the ocean. They put their goggles on, and then they come out and they end up burnt around here because they haven't waited that amount of time. Those goggles are rubbed and come off, or they dive in the water and then they're rubbing like this, and then you can see where they've actually rubbed off the sunscreen. So it's really important that we have that time before that actual exposure where it's being rubbed in well, where it's had that time to adhere. And also it's really important, no matter what it says on the bottle, reapply it every 2 hours. Okay, I know, might as well have shares in sunscreen companies with, or the amount of sunscreen that we need to use, but it's better than having a child burnt to a crisp who's going to end up with melanoma in their later years. It's really important that we do protect our kids from the sun. Yes, we need sun. Yes, kids need to get out there. They need to be outside. But we live in Australia. In Australia, we have really harsh UV conditions. So yes, they do need sun to synthesize vitamin D, but we do not need to cook our kids. It's really important. So just to recap that, we need a liberal amount. Spray sunscreens, be very careful with them, because what can happen is that you may not put anywhere near enough on. Being able to use enough, so for an adult, 35 mils, okay, that's a lot of sunscreen. That's about a teaspoon per limb, back, front, face, neck, okay, 35 mils. Making sure that you put it on 20 minutes before you go outside, reapplying every 2 hours. And a lot of people are concerned, you know, there was a lot of stuff about the Peppa Pig sunscreen last year, year before, a few years, about children having reactions to them. What's really important is that you patch test a sunscreen before you put it on your child. So you can fork out a bucket load of cash trying different sunscreens. My oldest child is really, really sensitive to sunscreen. What happens to her is that she breaks out in an alert. She has an allergy, so she breaks out in what we call urticaria or hives with a lot of sunscreens. So I think we spent a fortune trying to test each one. But what I recommend, when you're at mother's group or at the park or with family, just do a patch test of different types of sunscreen, because, you know, we've always got it in our handbags, all that kind of stuff. Have a little patch test just on the inside of the elbow, something like that, and see and make sure your child doesn't have a reaction. That'll save you a ton of cash, believe me. Also recapping as well that, remember, the Australian College of Dermatologists recommend that for babies, particularly under the age of 6 months, that we use a physical sunscreen. So what that does is it actually is that physical barrier. So we're talking like a zinc oxide, something like that. And you need to just, you'll find the one that works for your child. And that's really important, because I know that with some sunscreens, they just don't work properly for me. Other ones do work well and we don't have reaction. So what I recommend is that you'd share a bit of sunscreen around your friends, patch test, see if it works for your child, and take it from there. Now, what I'd love to ask is, are there any questions at all tonight about using sunscreen in babies and kids? What I'd love you to do too, if you have found a sunscreen that is absolutely unreal, tell us about it. Put it in the comments. One of the things that we get asked all the time is, what do you use, Sarah? So I'm going to tell you what works for my family. This is not endorsed in any way, okay? There's no sponsorship, there's no nothing. This is simply what works for my kids. You need to find out what works for yours, okay? So in our household, what we use is, remember, my kids are older now. Mine are 9 and 11. So we use a combination of zinc and also, so a physical sunscreen and also a UV absorber as well. So we happen to love this one, which is Feel Good Ink, which is a sunscreen that also comes in sensitive as well. It can be a bit tricky to find, but they are online. So my daughter, who's sensitive to everything, doesn't react to this one, and so that's why we choose that for her. It's not cheap, but it's we have to protect our kids' skin, so that's one of them. One of the other sunscreens that we love as well, because I've got a couple of surfers in the family as well, is a really good mineral sunscreen that doesn't tend to come off when they rub. This one is, the active ingredient is zinc oxide, so we like the surf mud lotion as well, which is, it just works well. So there's no chemical UV filters in this one. There's no petrochemicals, mineral oils, anything like that. It is basically zinc oxide. So that's, and it just sticks really particularly well. So if you've got one who's in and out all the time, that's what we use. We love Whatnot as well. That one, the Whatnot sunscreen, works fantastically for us. My husband, who is a sweater, when he's out there going for a run or something like that, he will actually use Cancer Council stuff. He finds that works really, really well for him, but he's a grown up, and I can't use that on my kids. They react, but he's got no problems with it. So we've all kind of got what we like and what's good for our skin. So it's about finding out for you what works for you in your family. Casey has just said that Mugu natural sunscreen is a winner in her household. We've used that one too. I used to use that all the time when the kids were babies as well. So we used to chop and change between Whatnot and the Mugu. So yeah, absolutely, that is fantastic. And one other thing too is that we, particularly when you're out swimming, if you, for example, we went to the Barrier Reef, be careful what you put on your body. You've got to use a reef-friendly sunscreen as well. That's particularly why we liked this one too, because this is reef-friendly. So that's another reason why we chose that one. Are there any other questions or any other hints at all? So if you've got a comment, please pop it down below. What I would also love you to do is tell us, what would you like us to talk about next? So we are going to be bringing a whole lot of summer subjects to you over the next few weeks leading up to Christmas as well. So stay tuned for those. They're in our event section on Facebook as well, and we will let you know before that happens. And the other thing that I want you to do, and I always ask this because it is so important, is please don't put it off any longer. Please book in to your paediatric first aid course now. Give us a ring at CPR Kids. We'll book you in. If we're not near you, we will help you find a first aid provider that is, because I'd never want you to be the parent who said, I didn't know what to do. These are life-saving skills, and so please make sure that you know what to do. All right, everyone. I will see you soon for another live. Make sure that you pop your comments down below, and I'll see you soon. Good night, everyone.